Angela heard the cry just after dawn, faint, desperate, coming from behind the kitchen. She followed the sound to the trash bins and froze. There, inside the dumpster, wrapped in a yellow blanket, was a newborn baby, lips blue, barely breathing. She pulled the child out and held her close, trying to warm her tiny body. And that's when Julian Marshall's car pulled up. He stepped out, saw his housekeeper standing by the dumpster, holding a baby he'd never seen before. And in that moment, everything he thought he knew about her shattered. Julian Marshall had cut his London business trip short to surprise his 8-year-old daughter Emma before her Friday school recital. The September morning was cool and quiet. He pulled into the estate at 6:30 a.m., earlier than anyone expected, and then he saw her. Angela David, his housekeeper of 3 years, standing near the trash bins behind the kitchen, holding a screaming newborn wrapped in yellow. Julian's entire body went rigid. "What the hell is this, Mr. Marshall?" Angela spun around, eyes wide with shock and relief. "I didn't know you were coming home." "Whose baby is that?" Julian's voice was ice cold. Angela stepped toward him, the baby pressed against her chest. "Sir, please, just let me explain." "Explain?" Julian was already moving closer, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. "Did you give birth? Is this yours? How long has this been going on?" "It's not mine." "Then whose is it?" His voice rose, sharp and cutting. "Do you understand what you've done? My daughter lives here. I trusted you." The baby screamed louder, as if feeling the tension. Derek, the estate security officer, appeared from the side entrance, his hand on his radio. "Mr. Marshall, everything okay?" Julian didn't take his eyes off Angela. "I don't know yet." Angela's hands trembled. "Please, sir, just read the note. It's not what you think. This is about your family, not mine." Julian froze. "What did you just say?" Angela's voice broke as tears filled her eyes. "His name is David. He's your nephew. And 3 days ago, his mother left him in that dumpster to die. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, if you've ever saved someone and got punished for it, this story will break your heart and put it back together. Because sometimes, God uses the most broken people to do the most beautiful things." Julian's legs went weak. "My nephew?" The words barely came out. "David's been dead for 6 months." Angela pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. Her hands were shaking. "Madison left this." Julian took it. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. "I can't do this alone. David's gone. The money's gone. I'm gone. Please save him. Don't let them take him. I'm sorry. M. He read it twice before it made sense. "She was pregnant?" His voice broke. Nobody knew. Tears streamed down Angela's face. "She gave birth alone. 3 days ago, she left him in that dumpster to die." Julian stared at the baby. His brother's son. "Where is she now?" "I don't know." Angela's voice cracked. "Her apartment's empty. Her phone's dead. I've been searching everywhere. Hospitals, shelters. Nothing. 3 days. Julian's face went pale. "You've had him for 3 days? You were in London." And the note, she begged me not to let them take him. So I used everything. My rent money, $527. I've been hiding him in my room because I was terrified. "Daddy?" Julian froze. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit. "Emma, go back inside." "Is the baby okay?" Her voice was so small, so scared. "Did you tell Daddy?" Julian's heart stopped. "Emma," he knelt down slowly. "What are you talking about?" She looked at Angela, then back at him. "I've been helping her, Daddy. At night, after you tuck me in, I go to Angela's room and help feed him." The air left Julian's lungs. His 8-year-old daughter, sneaking out, caring for a baby he didn't even know existed, while he was halfway across the world, completely blind. He stood up, his voice barely holding together. "Derek, pull up the security footage, right now." Inside the small office, Derek's fingers moved across the keyboard. September 18th, 2:47 a.m. The screen flickered to life. A car rolled through the back gate, slow, almost ghost-like. A woman stepped out. Julian leaned closer. "Madison." She looked hollow, empty, like she wasn't really there anymore. She opened the back door, pulled out something, wrapped in cloth, walked toward the dumpster. Julian's throat closed. She lifted the lid, placed the bundle inside, stood there, staring down. Then, Derek's phone rang, cutting through the silence. He answered, listened. His face went white. "Mr. Marshall," his voice was tight, "you need to take this." He handed Julian the phone. "Mr. Marshall?" A woman's voice, professional but strained. "This is St. Catherine's Hospital. We have Madison Marshall here. She was admitted 3 days ago after an overdose. She's alive, but barely. You need to come now." Julian's hand gripped the phone so hard it almost cracked. "We're on our way." He hung up, looked at Angela, at Emma, at the baby, and realized everything he thought he knew about his life had just been torn apart. But the worst part? He still didn't know the full truth about what Madison had done that night, or why. The car was silent except for the baby's soft breathing. Julian drove. Angela sat in the back with the baby in her arms. Emma squeezed between them, her small hand resting on Angela's knee. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. Julian's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind racing through everything he should have done differently, everything he'd missed. "Mr. Marshall," Angela's voice was barely a whisper, "I need to tell you something." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "The night I found him." He wasn't crying at first. He was so cold he couldn't even make a sound. Julian's jaw tightened. "I thought he was already gone," Angela continued, her voice breaking. "But then I felt his little chest move, just barely, and I ran. I wrapped him in my coat and ran to my room and turned the heat up as high as it would go." Emma looked up at her. "You saved him." "I prayed," Angela whispered. "I prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life. I said, 'God, please don't let this baby die. Not like this. Not alone.'" Julian's throat burned. "Why didn't you call 911? His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Angela was quiet for a moment. "Because I was scared," she said finally. "Scared they'd take him. Scared they'd blame me. Scared nobody would believe that I was just trying to help." Julian pulled onto the highway. The hospital was 20 minutes away. "I should have trusted you." The words felt like glass coming out. "I looked at you and assumed the worst. I didn't even give you a chance to explain." "You were scared too," Angela said softly. "That's not an excuse." Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "Daddy, is Aunt Madison going to be okay?" Julian's hands tightened on the wheel. "I don't know, sweetheart. Is she sick?" "Yes, very sick. In her body or her heart." Julian's eyes burned. His 8-year-old daughter understood more than he'd given her credit for. "Her heart," he said quietly. "Her heart is very, very sick." Emma looked down at the baby. "But her heart made him. So part of her heart is still good, right?" Angela's tears fell silently. Julian couldn't answer. They drove past exit signs, strip malls, gas stations, normal life moving around them while their world was falling apart. "What if she doesn't want to see us?" Angela asked suddenly. "What if she's angry I didn't let him go?" "Then we'll deal with it," Julian said. "But she needs to know he's alive. She needs to see that." The hospital sign appeared ahead. St. Catherine's Medical Center, 2 miles. Julian took the exit, and as they pulled into the parking lot, one thought burned through his mind louder than anything else. What if they were already too late? What if Madison had given up completely? And what if seeing this baby alive, breathing, safe, was the one thing that could either save her or destroy her? The psychiatric ward smelled like disinfectant and despair. A nurse led them down a long hallway. Her shoes squeaked against the tile. "She's been very quiet," the nurse said softly. "Hasn't spoken since she woke up." They stopped at room 247. The nurse knocked gently, then pushed the door open. Madison sat in a chair by the window, thin, so thin Julian barely recognized her. Her hair hung limply around her face, hospital gown sliding off her shoulders. She didn't turn when they entered. "Madison." Julian's voice came out rough. She flinched. Angela stepped forward slowly, the baby in her arms. "Madison, it's Angela. I found him 3 days ago. He was cold, but I warmed him up. I kept him safe, just like you asked." Madison's shoulders tensed. Then she saw the baby's reflection in the window glass. Her whole body started shaking. "No." The word came out broken. He's supposed to be gone. Madison. He's okay. I left him there so he wouldn't suffer. Her voice cracked. So he wouldn't grow up knowing his mother wanted to die. Julian moved closer. Madison? Look at me. She shook her head. I can't. Every time I look at him, all I see is David, your brother, the man you abandoned. The words hit Julian like a fist. You cut him off when he needed you most, Madison whispered. And then he died. And I was pregnant. And I had nobody. She finally turned around. Her face was hollow, eyes swollen and red. I went to your mother 3 months ago. Told her I was pregnant. Begged for help. Her voice dropped. She said, handle it privately. The Marshall name can't afford another embarrassment. Julian's blood went cold. So I did. I gave birth alone. Lived in my car for 2 weeks. And when I looked at that baby and felt nothing, I brought him to the one person I thought might care. She looked at Angela. And you did. Angela's tears fell silently. He needs you, Madison, she whispered. He needs his mother. I'm not a mother. I'm broken. Madison's voice shattered. Why else would I leave him in a dumpster? The baby stirred, started to cry. Madison covered her ears, started rocking. Make it stop, please. Julian knelt in front of her chair. You're right. I failed, David. I let my pride kill my brother. His voice broke. But you didn't fail this baby. You brought him to someone who could save him. That was brave. Madison's hands slowly dropped. Her eyes drifted to the baby. He looks like David, she whispered. Angela took a step forward. Do you want to hold him? Madison's hands trembled. She opened her mouth to answer, and the door burst open. Eleanor Marshall stood there, Julian's mother, perfectly dressed, makeup flawless. Her eyes swept the room, landed on the baby, then on Madison. What, she said coldly, is going on here? Eleanor's heels clicked against the hospital floor as she stepped inside. Her eyes moved from Madison to the baby, then to Julian. So it's true, she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. David's widow had a child and kept it hidden. Julian stood slowly. Mother, don't. She held up one hand. I received a very disturbing call from the hospital. Imagine my shock when they told me Madison was here, alive, with a baby. Madison shrank back in her chair. You knew, Julian said quietly. 3 months ago, she came to you for help. Eleanor's face didn't change. I offered her practical advice. You turned her away. I suggested she handle the situation privately, as any reasonable person would. Angela's arms tightened around the baby. She was pregnant and grieving. She needed family. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Angela, cold, measuring. And who are you to speak on family matters? She's the one who saved him, Julian said, his voice hard now. When Madison left him to die, Angela used her last dollar to keep him alive. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Left him where, exactly? In a dumpster, Madison whispered, her voice barely audible. Behind the kitchen. I left my son in a dumpster because I had nowhere else to go. The room went silent. Eleanor stared at her, and for just a moment, just a flicker, something passed across her face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Then it's fortunate someone found him, Eleanor said coolly. Now we can arrange proper care, a private adoption, discreet. The child will have a good life, and Madison can receive the help she clearly needs. No. Julian's voice cut through the room like a blade. Eleanor turned to him. Excuse me, he's not being adopted out. He's David's son. He's family. Julian, be reasonable. I'm done being reasonable. His voice rose. I'm done protecting the Marshall name while people suffer. David died because I cared more about image than my own brother. I won't make that mistake again. Eleanor's jaw tightened. You're being emotional. I'm being human. Emma, who'd been silent this whole time, stepped forward. Her small voice filled the space. Grandma, why don't you love us? Eleanor froze. Emma, that's not. You didn't help Aunt Madison when she was sad. You didn't help the baby. You only care about our last name. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But names don't hug you. People do. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, her mask cracked. Just slightly. Emma, you don't understand. I understand that Angela loves us more than you do. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's face went pale. Julian put his hand on Emma's shoulder. looked at his mother. She's right. And until you can see that, you're not welcome around this child. Eleanor's eyes went wide. Julian, you can't possibly… I just did. For a long moment, Eleanor stood there, silent, her perfect composure finally cracking at the edges. Then she turned on her heel and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Madison looked up at Julian, her face wet with tears. You just lost your mother because of me. No, Julian said quietly. I just found my family. But as he said the words, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. He opened it, and his blood turned to ice. The message was simple, only 4 words. She's not the only one. Julian stared at his phone. She's not the only one. His heart pounded in his chest. What is it? Angela asked. Julian looked up. Madison was watching him from her chair. Emma stood close to Angela, one hand resting on the baby's blanket. I just got a text, he said slowly, from a number I don't recognize. What does it say? He held up the phone so Angela could see. Her face went pale. Madison's eyes widened. Wait, what does that mean? I don't know. Julian's mind raced. Do you know anyone else who knew about the baby? Madison shook her head. Nobody. I didn't tell anyone. That was the whole point. I was too ashamed. Julian looked at the message again. Then, at Madison. Think carefully. The night you left him, did anyone see you? Anyone at all? Madison's face crumpled as she tried to remember. I don't. I was barely there. I drove up, put him down, and left. It was dark. There was no one around. What about before that? At the hospital? When you gave birth? I used my maiden name. Monroe. Madison Monroe. Nobody knew who I really was. Julian's jaw tightened. Then who sent this? The room fell silent. Emma's small voice broke through. Maybe someone was trying to help. Julian looked down at his daughter. What do you mean, sweetheart? Maybe someone saw Aunt Madison and wanted to make sure the baby was okay. So they're telling you now. Angela nodded slowly. She might be right. If someone knew Madison was in trouble, maybe they've been watching, waiting to see if the baby survived. Julian's phone buzzed again. Another text. Check the hospital records. September 15th. Labor and delivery. You'll understand. His hands trembled as he typed back. Who is this? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then one final message came through. Someone who should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry. Julian looked at Madison. September 15th. That's when you gave birth? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Did anything happen that day? Anything unusual? Madison's breath caught. There was a nurse. She stayed with me the whole time because I was alone. She kept asking if I had anyone to call. I told her no. I told her I had nobody. Do you remember her name? She didn't wear a name tag. Or maybe she did and I don't remember. I was so tired, so empty. Julian pulled up the number and tried calling it. It rang once, then a recorded message. The number you have dialed is not in service. He looked at Angela. At Madison. At Emma. Someone knows what happened. And they're trying to tell us something. Angela's voice was barely a whisper. What if there's another baby? The words hung in the air like a weight. Madison's face went white. No, that's not possible. I only had one. Not yours, Angela said carefully. But what if someone else left a baby that night? What if someone else was desperate like you were? Julian's mind spun. Madison covered her mouth with her hand. Oh God, she whispered. There was a girl, in the hallway, young, maybe 17. She was crying, alone. The nurse went to her after she finished with me. Julian's blood ran cold. What happened to her? I don't know. I left before morning. I couldn't stay there. Julian looked at the text again. She's not the only one. His phone buzzed one more time. A photo this time. He opened it, and his heart stopped. It was a picture of a hospital bassinet. Empty. With a handwritten note taped to the side. Please forgive me. I can't do this. L. Julian showed the photo to Angela. Her hand flew to her mouth. Madison leaned forward from her chair, squinting at the screen. When she saw it, she went completely still. That's the same hospital, she whispered. That's the same floor I was on. Julian's hands shook. When was this taken? He checked the metadata on the photo. His stomach dropped. September 15th, 11:47 p.m. The same night Madison gave birth. Angela's voice was barely audible. There was another baby. Julian looked at her. And someone took this picture. Someone knew. But why wait 3 days to tell anyone? Madison asked, her voice rising. If there was another baby, why didn't they? She stopped. Her face crumpled. Because no one reported it, she said quietly. Just like no one reported mine. The truth settled over them like ice water. 2 women. 2 babies. Both abandoned on the same night. And no one had said a word. Julian's phone rang. He answered immediately. Mr. Marshall? It was a woman's voice, older, shaking. My name is Diane Porter. I'm a nurse at County General. I sent you those messages. Julian's pulse quickened. Where's the baby? The one in the photo? Silence on the other end. Miss Porter, where is the baby? I don't know. Her voice broke. The girl, she was 17. She gave birth alone. No family. No ID. She left the baby in the bassinet and disappeared before morning rounds. And you didn't report it? I tried. Diane's voice cracked. I told my supervisor. She said the girl probably came back for the baby during shift change, that it happens sometimes. She told me not to make a fuss, not to create paperwork for nothing. Julian's jaw clenched. So you just let it go? No. Diane was crying now. I checked the security footage myself. I saw the girl leave, alone, empty-handed. I saw someone else come in 20 minutes later. A man. He took the baby and walked out like it was nothing. Angela grabbed Julian's arm. Did you see his face? No. He wore a hood. But I have the footage. I saved it before they could delete it. They tried to delete it? Julian's voice went cold. The hospital doesn't want this getting out. 2 abandoned babies in one night? Do you know what that would do to their reputation? Madison stood up slowly, her legs shaking. So they covered it up. I'm so sorry, Diane whispered. I should have done more. I should have called the police. But I was scared of losing my job. And then I saw the news about your nephew, about your housekeeper saving him. And I realized that you could have saved the other one too, Julian finished. Diane sobbed on the other end. Julian closed his eyes. Send me the footage. Everything you have. Right now. Okay. But Mr. Marshall, there's something else you need to know. What? The girl, before she left, she wrote something on the whiteboard in her room. Just 2 words. Julian's heart pounded. What did she write? Diane's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Help me. The line went dead. Julian looked at Angela, at Madison, at Emma, standing there with her small hand on the baby's blanket, and he realized something that made his blood run cold. Someone had taken that second baby, on purpose, and if they didn't find him soon, they might never find him at all. His phone buzzed. The footage came through. Julian opened it with shaking hands, and what he saw made everything worse. Because the man in the hood? He wasn't a stranger. Julian had seen him before. Julian hit play on the video. The footage was grainy, black and white, time-stamped September 15th, 11:52 p.m. A figure entered the hospital room, hood pulled low, moving quickly but not running. He walked straight to the bassinet, looked down, then lifted the baby out with both hands, cradled it against his chest, and walked out. The whole thing took 43 seconds. Julian rewound it, paused on the moment the man's face turned slightly toward the camera, just for a split second, but it was enough. Angela leaned closer. Do you know him? Julian's mouth went dry. That's Paul. Who's Paul? My driver. Julian's voice came out hollow. He's worked for me for 8 years. The room went silent. Madison's hands gripped the arms of her chair. Your driver took a baby from the hospital? I don't understand. Julian's mind raced. Why would he? And then it hit him. Paul's daughter. 3 months ago, Paul had asked for time off. Said his daughter was going through something. Family emergency. Julian had approved it without asking questions, because he never asked questions. He just signed papers and moved on. His daughter, Julian whispered. She's 17. She got pregnant last year. He was devastated, said she was too young, that her life would be ruined. Angela's face went pale. You think she's the girl who gave birth that night? I don't know. But if she was... Julian stopped. His hands were shaking now. If she was, and Paul knew she couldn't keep the baby. Maybe he thought he was helping her. Maybe he took the baby to give it to someone. Or maybe he left it somewhere, Madison said quietly. Just like I did. The words hung heavy in the air. Julian looked at the baby in Angela's arms. This tiny nephew, who'd almost died because the people who were supposed to love him had failed. And now there was another one, another child, another desperate mother, another man making a terrible choice. "We have to find him," Julian said. His voice was steady now, resolved. "We have to find Paul, and we have to find that baby." Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, what if the baby's already gone?" Julian knelt down, looked his daughter in the eyes. "Then we'll make sure people know what happened, so it never happens again." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it, because the truth was darker than that. People had known. The hospital knew, the supervisor knew, Diane knew, and they'd all chosen silence. Just like he'd chosen silence when David needed him. Just like Eleanor had chosen silence when Madison begged for help. Angela's voice broke through his thoughts. "Julian, what if Paul's daughter is still out there? What if she's like Madison, alone, scared, thinking she has no one?" Julian stood slowly. "Then we find her too." He pulled out his phone, dialed Paul's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then, voicemail. "Paul, it's Julian. I need you to call me back immediately. It's urgent." He hung up, looked at the others. "We're going to his house, right now." Madison stood up, her legs still shaky. "I'm coming with you." "Madison, you need to rest." "No." Her voice was firm, stronger than it had been all day. "That girl, whoever she is, she's me. And if there's any chance I can help her, I have to try." Julian looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen before. Strength. Angela nodded. "We all go." They walked out of the hospital together, and as they reached the parking lot, Julian's phone buzzed one more time. A text from Paul's phone, but the words weren't Paul's. "Please don't come looking for us. It's already too late." Julian's car tore through the streets. Paul lived 20 minutes outside the city, a small house on a quiet street. White fence, normal, forgettable. Nobody spoke during the drive. When they pulled up, the house was dark. Julian killed the engine. "Stay here," he said. "No." Angela was already unbuckling. "We go together." They walked to the front door. Julian knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time. Still, nothing. "Paul," Julian's voice echoed down the empty street. "I know you're in there. Open the door." Silence. Then a sound, faint, from inside, crying. Not a baby. A girl. Julian's heart stopped. "Paul, I'm not leaving. Either you open this door, or I'm calling the police." A long pause. Then the lock clicked. The door opened slowly. Paul stood there, mid-50s, grey hair disheveled, eyes red and swollen. He looked broken. "Mr. Marshall," he whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "Where's your daughter?" Paul's face crumpled. "Upstairs." "And the baby?" Paul's knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. "He's gone." Angela gasped. "What do you mean, gone?" Julian's voice was sharp. "I tried." Paul's voice cracked. "I swear to God I tried. But she couldn't keep him. She's 17. No money, no support. I thought I was protecting her." "So what did you do?" Julian stepped closer. "I took him to a church." Paul's tears fell freely now. "St. Mary's, 2 towns over. I left him in a basket at the back door during Sunday service. I thought someone would find him, someone who could give him a real life." Madison pushed past Julian. When did you leave him?" "This morning, right after dawn." Angela's eyes went wide. "That was hours ago. Did anyone find him?" "I don't know," Paul sobbed. "I drove away. I couldn't watch. I couldn't." Julian pulled out his phone, started dialing. "What church? Which one exactly?" "St. Mary's on Oakwood. But Mr. Marshall, I already called them an hour ago. They said no one found a baby. They checked everywhere." Julian froze mid-dial. "Then where is he?" The question hung in the air like smoke. From upstairs, the crying got louder. A girl's voice, broken, desperate. "Daddy, where's my baby? Please, where's my baby?" Paul covered his face with his hands. "She didn't want to give him up. I made her. I told her it was the only way. And now he's gone, and I don't know where he is, and she's—" He couldn't finish. Madison moved past him, headed for the stairs. "Madison, wait," Julian started, but she was already climbing. She reached the top, pushed open a bedroom door. A girl sat on the floor, thin, pale, rocking back and forth, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together. She looked up when Madison entered. Their eyes met, and Madison saw herself. She dropped to her knees in front of the girl. "I'm Madison," she said softly, "and 3 days ago I left my baby in a dumpster because I thought he'd be better off without me." The girl's eyes widened. "But he wasn't," Madison continued, her voice breaking. "He needed me, and your baby needs you too, so we're going to find him. Together. Do you hear me? We're going to bring him home." The girl's face crumpled. "What if we're too late? Then we'll face it together," Madison whispered. "But I don't think we are, because someone's been watching over these babies, someone who won't let them disappear." She took the girl's hands in hers. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl whispered. "Lily, when's the last time you prayed?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know if God hears people like me." "He does," Madison said. "I promise you, he does." Downstairs, Julian's phone rang. He answered. "Mr. Marshall?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "My name is Father Michael from St. Mary's. We just found something unusual in our donation box." Julian's heart pounded. "What did you find?" "A baby boy, wrapped in a hospital blanket. He's safe." "But Mr. Marshall..." "What?" "There's a note with him. It has your phone number on it." They found him at St. Mary's an hour later. Father Michael met them at the door, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He led them to his office, and there, sleeping in a makeshift cradle made from a donation box lined with blankets, was a baby boy. Lily ran to him, dropped to her knees, lifted him into her arms, and sobbed. Not from sadness this time, from relief, from joy, from something she thought she'd lost forever. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his tiny ear. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mama's here now. Mama's here." Paul stood in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he said to no one and everyone. "I thought I was protecting her. I thought..." "You were scared," Julian said quietly. "We all were." Madison sat beside Lily on the floor, put her arm around the girl's shoulders. "It's going to be okay," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." Lily looked at her. "How did you survive it? The shame? The feeling like you ruined everything?" Madison smiled through her tears. "I didn't. Not alone. But then I met people who saw me, really saw me, and they didn't let me disappear." She looked at Angela. Angela, still holding baby David, knelt down beside them. "You're both mothers," she said softly. "Broken, scared, beautiful mothers. And these babies? They don't need perfect. They just need you, present, trying, loving them, even when it's hard." Emma stepped forward, looked at both babies. "They're so small," she whispered, "but they made all of us bigger." Julian pulled his daughter close. She was right. These two tiny boys, abandoned, almost lost, had torn open every wall he'd built, every lie he'd told himself about what family meant. Father Michael cleared his throat gently. "What happens now?" Julian looked at Paul, at Lily, at Madison, at Angela holding his nephew. "Now," he said slowly, "we build something better." 3 months later, the Marshall estate looked different. Madison lived in the guest house, healthy and working as a volunteer counselor for new mothers. Lily and her son lived there too, finishing her senior year online while Paul helped with childcare. Angela had her own cottage on the property, renovated, beautiful, with a nursery where baby David slept safely every night. And Julian? He'd cut his work travel by 70%, started a foundation with one mission. No mother should ever feel so alone that abandoning her child feels like the only option. They called it the David and Daniel Foundation, for the two boys who almost disappeared. On a Sunday morning in December, they all gathered in the south garden. Emma sat on the grass between the two babies, making them giggle. Madison and Lily talked quietly on the bench, sharing the kind of stories only they could understand. Paul stood nearby, watching his daughter laugh for the first time in months. Angela sat beside Julian. "You did it," she said softly. "You built a family." "We did it," Julian corrected. "You showed me how." "No," Angela smiled. "God showed you. I just didn't let you look away." Julian looked around at the people scattered across his lawn. Broken people, messy people, people who'd made terrible choices and somehow found grace anyway. "Do you think they'll be okay?" he asked. Angela watched Emma lift baby David into her lap. I think they already are. And as the December sun warmed their faces, Julian realized something he'd never understood before. Wealth wasn't what you kept. It was what you gave away when someone needed it most. Power wasn't control. It was kneeling down when someone was too broken to stand. And family? Family wasn't blood. It was showing up, again and again and again. Even when it cost you everything. Especially then. "What the hell are you doing to my children?" Richard Walker's voice cracked through the marble silence, thundering down the sunlit corridor like a shockwave. He stood frozen in the doorway of the sitting room, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Hannah didn't move. Mist lingered in the air, catching beams of sunlight, scattering them like tiny stars across the floor. Ella and Jane, his blind 6-year-old daughters, were laughing and following the sparkles with their eyes. Hannah still held the spray bottle in her hand. The look on her face wasn't guilt, it wasn't fear, it was something more dangerous. Hope. Richard's eyes went wide. "Are you insane?" he barked. "I gave you strict instructions." Hannah didn't answer. Not yet. She couldn't. Not when Ella's face was glowing. Not when Jane was reaching out toward the light. For a split second, the world slowed down. In that silence, Hannah thought only one thing. This is it. This is the moment everything breaks. Or everything begins. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind. 6 weeks earlier. Back to the day a young woman stepped onto the grounds of the Walker estate with nothing but a duffel bag and a quiet promise she'd made to herself long ago. Help where you can, even if it costs you everything. The mansion stood like a monument to grief, towering, beautiful, cold, gilded mirrors that never reflected joy, velvet curtains that blocked more than sunlight, hallways that swallowed every sound. It was a house built on billions and broken hearts. Richard Walker, the tech mogul whose empire had changed the digital world, hadn't smiled in years. Not since the crash, not since the twins lost their mother and their sight. He buried himself in code, in contracts, in control. Dozens of nannies had come and gone, some left after a week, others were escorted out in tears. And the girls? Sweet, silent Ella, thoughtful, dreamy Jane. They lived in shadows, not just because they were blind, but because no one dared bring them light. That's when Hannah arrived. 29, a quiet presence. Scrubs instead of silk, a gentle voice, a steady hand. The staff didn't ask questions. The housekeeper, Rosa, only offered a warning. "Keep your head down. He doesn't like surprises." And Hannah nodded, smiled politely, but said nothing. Because Hannah had learned something long ago, something she never told anyone at the agency, that beneath every silent child was a voice waiting to be heard. And behind every locked door was a chance waiting to be taken. She wasn't just a nanny, she used to be something else entirely, and she hadn't come here to babysit, she'd come here to begin again. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this video makes you believe nothing is impossible, if only you believe. For a long time after he shouted, no one moved. Not Hannah, not the girls, not even Richard. The mist still lingered in the air, sparkling in the light. Ella giggled. Jane reached forward, fingertips outstretched, eyes wide. And Richard, the billionaire who ran entire continents from behind a desk, stood frozen, watching his blind daughters follow the light. Hannah didn't speak. Her chest rose and fell slowly. One hand still held the spray bottle, the other curled gently around
Something in
Jane's
the air
back.
shifted, fragile, electric, irreversibly changed, and in that suspended moment, a story was already unraveling. Let's go back. 6 weeks earlier, before the sparkles, before the laughter, before the unspoken rules were broken, back to the day a woman with a quiet smile and a duffel bag crossed the iron gates of the Walker estate and stepped into a house that didn't remember how to feel. The mansion was silent, not peaceful, not calm, Just silent. Walls too clean, mirrors too polished. The kind of place where footsteps echo even when you try not to exist. The staff moved like clockwork. Everything choreographed. Breakfast at 8, tutors at 9, nap at 1. No deviations, no surprises. Rosa, the housekeeper, barely looked up from the linens when Hannah arrived. She handed her a clipboard and murmured without emotion, "Just follow the schedule. Don't try to fix anything here." Hannah nodded. She understood what that meant. This wasn't a home. It was a museum of what used to be. Upstairs the girls were waiting. Ella and Jane, 6 years old, tiny, delicate, identical in every way, except in spirit. They sat across from each other in a massive playroom filled with untouched toys, their heads tilted slightly toward the window, but not quite facing the light. There was no laughter, no eye contact, no curiosity, only stillness. They'd been blind since the accident, the one that took their mother. And since that day, Richard Walker had thrown himself into silence. Grief turned into routine. Routine turned into distance, and distance turned into control. Nannies came and went. Some left in tears. Others weren't even noticed. Hannah didn't come to make noise. She knew how to listen. And from the moment she stepped into the girls' room, she heard everything no one else seemed to hear. The way Ella's fingers lingered on textured fabrics, the way Jane tilted her head when the kettle whistled in the kitchen downstairs, the way both girls seemed to lean toward the warmth of morning sun, even if they couldn't see it. Tiny things, quiet things. But to Hannah they were loud, because once upon a time she had studied these moments, before the scandal, before the suspension, before her name was whispered behind closed doors and her research reduced to nothing. She was a therapist once, a gifted one, until one false accusation left her license in ashes and her belief in herself even more broken. Now she wore scrubs instead of lab coats, smiled quietly instead of presenting papers, and answered to parents who never asked who she used to be. But on her third night at the Walker estate, she couldn't sleep. Ella had laughed that day, just once, at the sound of a wooden spoon tapping a pan. It was small, a flicker, gone in a second. But for Hannah it lit something she hadn't felt in years, not ambition, not defiance, purpose. The next morning, she folded a scarf with a lavender scent and let the twins hold it during story time, just to see. They didn't speak, but they didn't let go either. She wrote it down in a notebook she never showed anyone. Not because she was planning anything, but because she wasn't ready to stop being who she was, and for the first time in years something inside her whispered, "You can still help, even if no one knows what you're doing." In the Walker mansion, silence wasn't just a sound. It was a rule, a rhythm, a way of life. No raised voices, no sudden laughter, no music that hadn't been approved and preloaded by staff. Everything was muted, as if the house itself was still grieving. Even the clocks ticked quietly. Hannah's first few days passed like pages turning in a book she hadn't chosen to read. Breakfast trays were delivered on time, lessons conducted through whispered instructions. The girls were dressed, fed, bathed, not touched too much, not spoken to unless necessary. They followed commands like wind-up dolls, but they never looked up. They didn't need to. There was nothing in this house worth looking at. The twins lived in routine. Not play, not presence, routine. Ella, the more expressive of the two, sometimes hummed under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Jane preferred silence. But when Hannah passed her a warm cloth during bath time, she held it a little longer than needed. These were the only signs of life she could find. They broke Hannah's heart, not with sadness, but with recognition, because she knew what it felt like, to still be breathing and not feel alive. The staff didn't speak unless spoken to. The chef left Hannah's meals in the back hallway. The driver rarely made eye contact. Only Rosa lingered. She watched Hannah carefully, the way a nurse might watch a patient who insists they're fine. One afternoon, as they folded sheets in the laundry room, Rosa said, without looking up, "You're not the first one to try." Hannah paused, a clean pillowcase in her hands. Rosa smoothed the edge of a fitted sheet and added, "Every nanny thinks they're going to save this place, but he doesn't let anyone in." "Richard?" Hannah asked quietly. "Mr. Walker," Rosa corrected her without hesitation. "You'll last longer if you don't forget that." There was no malice in her voice, just truth, a woman who'd seen too many people arrive with good hearts and leave with broken ones. Richard Walker was a ghost in his own home. Some nights, Hannah would hear the front door open at 2 a.m., then footsteps moving down the hall toward the west wing. Sometimes the girls asked if their father was back, but before Hannah could answer, they'd already turned over in bed, as if it didn't matter. And maybe it didn't. Not anymore. On the fifth night, Hannah sat by the window in her small attic room, watching fog roll in over the lawn. She hadn't spoken to Richard since the day he shook her hand at the door, briefly, like a man shaking off an obligation. He hadn't asked about her credentials, didn't want to know where she came from, only said, "They're fragile. Don't push them." That was it. No warmth, no hope. Just an unspoken warning. Don't try to fix what's already broken. But Hannah wasn't here to fix anything. Not anymore. She was just trying to remember who she used to be. Back in Chicago, there was a time her name had weight. She'd walked through children's hospitals and been greeted with nods of respect, smiles of relief. Her research had been featured at conferences. Her case studies praised. She'd spoken about the power of multisensory therapy with conviction. Now she was folding someone else's towels in a mansion full of ghosts. But purpose is stubborn. It doesn't always vanish when your reputation does. Sometimes it hides in the quiet and waits. The following morning, as Hannah brushed Jane's hair, a tiny thread of a smile pulled at the corner of the girl's lips. It was there for only a second. But that second was everything. Later that day, she walked past the playroom and paused. Ella was sitting alone with a small stuffed bear. Her fingers moved slowly over the fur, then up toward the bow on its neck. She wasn't playing, not quite, but she was feeling, exploring. That night, Hannah opened a drawer beside her bed and pulled out an old, worn leather journal. She hadn't touched it since the day everything fell apart, the day she swore she'd never practice again. But tonight she flipped to a blank page and wrote 5 words. Ella turned towards sound today. It wasn't a breakthrough. Not yet. But it was something. Something small. Something real. Something alive. It started with a hum. Hannah was slicing apples in the kitchen, the ones Ella liked peeled, the way Rosa showed her, and without thinking, she hummed a tune her mother used to sing while cooking. Nothing loud, just a soft, gentle melody floating through the still air. She didn't expect anyone to hear, but from the corner of the breakfast nook, Jane shifted, not just turned her head, tilted it, toward the sound, just a fraction of a second. But enough. Later that morning, during playtime, Hannah tried something else. A storybook, not read aloud but placed in front of the girls with a faint trace of lavender oil dabbed along the edge. Ella ran her fingers across the pages, stopped, smiled. A real one, subtle, but there. And that's when Hannah began logging every detail again, in that old leather notebook she thought she'd never open. She didn't call it therapy, didn't call it anything, just observation. The house was still watching. Richard hadn't spoken to her since the day she arrived, and Rosa was starting to linger near doorways a little too long. So Hannah moved carefully. No equipment, no protocols, no raised flags, just intention. She began to change the rhythm of their days. Not by much, but enough to let the girls feel. She played soft jazz during breakfast, just low enough to blend with the morning birds outside. She swapped synthetic bath soaps with organic ones, chamomile, vanilla, orange blossom. Each night, she used a warm, textured cloth to wipe their hands before bed, letting their skin memorize softness. The girls didn't talk about it, but they responded. Ella began reaching out first. Jane's posture straightened when Hannah entered the room. They started waiting for her, smiling when she arrived. It was during one of these small, silent victories that Hannah stopped outside the window of the music room and exhaled. She pressed a palm to the cold glass and whispered, "They're waking up." Then, a thought. A memory. A hallway in a hospital long ago, where she once taught a blind toddler to follow the vibration of a cello across a room. Back then, she had charts, staff, funding. But this time, all she had was instinct, and two little girls who didn't know they were healing. Have you ever had someone believe in your quietest potential, not when you were shining, but when you were still unsure? If someone once saw a light in you, when you couldn't see it yourself, tell us who they were in the comments. These people are rare, and they change everything. Back inside, Hannah pulled out a small toy from her personal bag, something she'd almost left behind when she packed for the job. A light wand, nothing fancy, just a slender tube that blinked in soft, shifting colors. She waited until nap time ended, until the room was dim, quiet, safe. Then she sat on the rug between the girls and whispered, "We're going to play a game." She didn't expect much. But when she flicked the wand on, Jane's fingers twitched. Ella turned her head, and for a second, just 1 second, her eyes fluttered. Not wide, not open, but searching. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, knees pulled to her chest, the notebook open on her lap. One word circled again and again. Reflex? She underlined it, then crossed it out. It wasn't a reflex. It was a response. The next morning, Rosa pulled her aside in the hallway, voice low, eyes sharp. "He has cameras in every room." Hannah blinked. "What?" "Mr. Walker, there are security feeds in the sitting room, bedrooms, even the playroom. He sees everything." Rosa stepped closer. "You're not like the others. You've lasted longer. Don't ruin it now." She walked away before Hannah could reply. But Hannah wasn't trying to last. She was trying to give those girls a shot. Every night the girls made progress, and every night Hannah felt the pull of a truth she had kept buried for years. She wasn't just a nanny, not really. She had once been something else, someone else. Before the scandal, before the silence, her name meant something. Dr. Hannah Elise Ford, pediatric sensory therapist. Respected, admired. She had lectured on neuroplasticity at Johns Hopkins. Her paper on cross-modal sensory recovery in blind children had been published in 3 languages. Hospitals flew her out to consult on complex cases. She'd been building something real. And then, everything collapsed. It started with a boy, a 6-year-old patient from a high-profile family in Chicago. She'd been treating him with a personalized sensory program, tactile pulses, spatial sound mapping, mild photic stimulation. The child was improving. Everyone saw it. But when he developed sudden seizures, the family blamed her. The father was a powerful donor. The media turned her research into headlines. Experimental therapy triggers emergency in child. Doctor under review after controversial stimulation session. It didn't matter that the seizures were later traced to an undiagnosed condition. By then, the hospital had already distanced itself. The board revoked her access. Her license was suspended, pending review. The clinic she'd just opened shuttered in 3 weeks. Funding pulled. Staff resigned. Her name, her work, gone overnight. She remembered packing her office at 2 a.m. No press, no defense, just one cardboard box and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She stopped answering calls. She stopped trying to explain. She disappeared. Her mother had begged her not to give up. "You're more than your title," she said. "Children still need you, even if the system doesn't. But when everything you built is stripped away, it takes a long time to believe you still have anything left to offer." And yet, here she was, in a mansion in Connecticut, holding a mist bottle in one hand and a little girl's progress in the other. Each day her instincts came back, not clinical ones, human ones. She remembered how to listen for breath changes, how to time music to touch, how to feel a child's world without needing to see it. But with every breakthrough came fear. Fear that Richard would find out, fear that she was risking more than just her job, fear that she would ruin everything, again. One evening, just after sunset, she sat on the window seat in the girls' room, watching Ella trace her fingers across a woven cushion. She whispered, "Do you know what this means?" Ella smiled, almost as if she did. Behind her, the door creaked. Rosa stood in the doorway. She'd seen the light wand earlier that week, and now she stood with folded arms and tired eyes. "Do you know what you're risking?" she asked. Hannah looked down at her hands. She wanted to lie, to say it was nothing, just toys, just play, but she couldn't, not anymore. "Yes," she said softly. Rosa also didn't answer right away. She looked at the twins, now giggling quietly as they tried to catch the edge of a fabric Hannah had scented with orange peel. Then she turned back to Hannah. Her voice was low, worn, but not unkind. "You'd better be right." That night Hannah stood alone in the hallway, hand on the doorknob of her attic room. She looked down the corridor, toward the west wing where Richard slept. Somewhere behind that door was a man still grieving, still angry, still convinced that protecting his daughters meant keeping them untouched. But he hadn't seen what Hannah had seen. He hadn't heard Jane whisper, "It smells like the sun," or watched Ella reach toward the mist and laugh like she was catching stars. Hannah turned the doorknob and stepped inside. She sat down at her small desk, opened her notebook and wrote, "I am not here to be safe. I'm here to give them light." The mansion had never been loud. Even before the accident, it had been more gallery than home. Everything in its place, every sound, measured. Even joy, if it ever lived here, had tiptoed. But that week, something changed. It didn't start with music or footsteps or words. It started with laughter. It was Ella first, a soft, startled giggle that slipped out when a breeze brushed past her cheek and carried the scent of tangerine. Hannah had mixed the oil into the lotion that morning. Nothing special, just something warm, something alive. Ella's head turned toward the air. She smiled, then laughed, as if the scent had tickled something inside her, something that had been asleep. Jane followed, not with noise but with movement. She began tracing the edge of her bedsheet in slow, looping spirals, as if following a trail only she could feel. When Hannah whispered, "What does it feel like?" Jane whispered back, "Like clouds, but warm." And that's when Hannah knew. It was time. Time to try what she'd been afraid to. Not recklessly, not without care, but fully, with hope. That morning, she prepared the room differently. She pulled the curtains open just enough to let a single beam of sunlight spill through. Soft music played in the corner, cello, low and rich. On the rug sat a basket of everyday objects, velvet ribbon, a sponge, a wooden spoon, a cold stone, textures, temperatures, tones. And one more thing, tucked quietly in her pocket. A mist bottle. She began gently, letting the girls explore each item with their hands, describing what they were feeling, mirroring their reactions with soft laughter of her own. Then she uncapped a small vial of peppermint oil, placed a drop on a piece of cloth, let it drift near them without touching. Jane inhaled. Her shoulders rose. She smiled, a full, radiant smile. Ella reached out for the cloth before Hannah even said a word. Then came the light. Hannah waited until they were settled, still, trusting. Then stood near the window, where the sun streamed in. She held the mist bottle in her hand. "Ready for something special?" she asked. The girls nodded. She gave one soft spray into the sunlight. And suddenly, the air glittered. Tiny droplets caught in the beam, turning gold and silver and weightless. Ella gasped. Jane's mouth opened. Their heads turned, together, toward the sparkles. Then, laughter, loud, free, real. They reached up, trying to touch the floating specks, chasing the shimmer with their fingers, not seeing, not exactly, but responding, to light, to motion, to magic. Hannah could hardly breathe. She dropped to her knees beside them, not to teach, but to join. They laughed together, like they were creating something sacred and new, something that had no name yet, just sound and joy and presence. Down the hall, Rosa paused mid-step. The sound
She turned
made her
back,
eyes
walked into
soften.
the kitchen and said quietly to the cook, "They're laughing in there." He looked up. "The girls?" Rosa nodded.
and neither of them said anything more. But something in the house shifted. That night, as Hannah tucked them in, Jane whispered, "The sparkles were dancing." Hannah kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, they were." Then Ella asked, "Can we do it again tomorrow?" Hannah smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. Every day. She stood at the doorway and watched them settle, and just before she turned off the lamp, Jane whispered something she hadn't said to anyone in over a year. "Good night." Hannah closed the door with shaking hands. She didn't cry. Not yet. She walked down the hall, past the cameras, past the rules, past the memory of everything she'd lost. Back to her room. She opened her notebook, wrote one word. Laughter. And under it, in smaller letters, "We're getting closer." Somewhere along the line, it stopped feeling like work. It wasn't caregiving, wasn't therapy. It was something quieter. Sacred almost. The kind of thing you didn't talk about, because saying it out loud might scare it away. By the second week, Hannah had a rhythm, not just in routine, but in her hands, her voice, the room. Every sense was a tool now. Soft music in the background, textures laid out with intention. Sunlight streaming through the window like a spotlight made just for them. The girls responded faster, reached out sooner, smiled wider. And one morning Jane whispered, "I saw sparkles again." That night, Hannah sat by the window with her journal open, tracing old diagrams she hadn't looked at in years. Her fingers hovered over one, a therapy protocol she'd designed long ago, back when her name still meant something. It was never approved. Too new, too ambitious. But it was hers. A multi-sensory stimulation model combining warmth, mist, sound, and refracted light to trigger dormant neural pathways. It had only ever lived in theory. Until now. Until this house, these girls, this chance. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sketched, planned, timed her breath. Because tomorrow, she would try it. All of it. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. Richard had left for New York. Rosa was occupied downstairs. It was just Hannah, the girls, and a chance to prove to herself that what she once believed in could still be real. She prepared the room like a stage, curtains drawn just enough, heat turned slightly higher, the mist bottle warmed in her hands, classical music low in the background. Ella sat cross-legged. Jane lay on her side, eyes half closed. Hannah began gently. First, scent, orange blossom, familiar, grounding. Then, texture, warm velvet against their palms. Then, sound, a chime, soft and distant. Then, mist. A light spray into the beam of morning sunlight. Tiny droplets shimmered through the air. Ella gasped. Jane sat upright. Their eyes followed the trail, not just turned, but tracked. Ella laughed. Jane clapped. Then Jane reached forward and said, "There, right there, it's shiny." Hannah's heart caught in her throat. "What do you see, baby?" Jane smiled. The sparkles dancing again. She almost cried, but she didn't. Not yet. She reached for her notebook with shaking hands. She'd barely written 2 words when it happened. Footsteps, fast, heavy, angry. Then, the door, swung open, hard, and there he was, Richard Walker, back early, suit half-buttoned, eyes scanning the scene like a man watching his house burn. He took one look at the mist in the air, the girls laughing on the rug, the spray bottle in Hannah's hand, and his face changed. "What is this?" he asked. His voice didn't rise, but it was sharp enough to cut through the air. Hannah stood slowly, shielding the girls without meaning to. She didn't say anything. Not yet. "I told you not to do this," he said. "No experiments, no therapy, no risks." His voice cracked slightly, not with rage, with fear. He took a step closer. "You don't know what you're doing." Hannah's voice was quiet, but steady. "I do." He stared at her like she was a stranger. "You're just a nanny." She swallowed hard, hands trembling, then said what she had promised herself she wouldn't. "I used to be a pediatric sensory therapist, one of the best. I designed the protocol you just witnessed. And your daughters—" She paused, looked down at them. "They're starting to see." For a full beat, no one spoke. The mist still hung in the light. The twins still laughed, unaware. And Richard Walker stood there, staring, not at Hannah, but through her, like he was watching something unravel in real time. "They're starting to see." Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper, but it landed like thunder. She knew what she was doing, and she knew what it could cost her. She stepped closer to the girls, slowly lowering the spray bottle, placing it on the rug like evidence at a crime scene. Richard's eyes didn't leave her. "You lied." "No," she said softly. "I didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." He let out a bitter breath. "You're not a caregiver." "I was. I am. But I'm also a therapist. I lost my license after a false malpractice claim. My name was dragged, my clinic was shut down. I stopped practicing now, but I didn't forget how." She looked up at him. "I wasn't experimenting on your daughters, Mr. Walker. I was helping them." Behind her, Jane laughed again, light, free, untouched by the tension. Ella turned her face toward the sunlight, fingers outstretched. Richard blinked. Once. Twice. Like he didn't know whether to scream or sit down. "You don't get to make decisions like this," he said finally. "They're my children." "And they're responding." Hannah took a breath. A deep one that held years. "You can fire me, report me. I won't stop you, but please." She glanced down. "Don't take this from them." Richard stared at his daughters. Jane was humming. Ella was reaching again, not blindly, but toward something. Light, sound, warmth, something real. His jaw clenched, his eyes dropped to the floor. The weight of grief wrapped around him like it always had. But this time it didn't protect him. It pressed. Hannah waited. Not with defiance, but with a quiet kind of strength. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving. And maybe that's what broke him. Not her words, not the science, but the silence, and how long his daughters had lived inside it. He spoke without looking at her. "Show me." She knelt beside the twins again, held the light wand gently between her fingers, switched it on. The soft, pulsing glow filled the air. "Ella," she whispered, "where's the sparkle?" Ella smiled. "There." She pointed, not randomly, directly toward the light. Then Jane reached for her sister's hand. "It's moving," she whispered. Richard didn't move, but his face crumbled, just a little. And in that fragile silence, not the cold kind, but the kind that lets something new in, Hannah said one last thing. "I never came here to be seen. But your daughters, they deserve to be." Have you ever stood in front of someone heart-pounding and told them the truth, knowing it might cost you everything? If you have, tell us what it taught you. Because sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stay honest when you have every reason not to. The next morning, Richard made a call. A quiet one. No lawyers, no staff. Just one name, Dr. Berman, a specialist in sensory neurodevelopment. Someone he hadn't spoken to since the twins were diagnosed. He asked for a favor. Then he walked down the hallway, stopped outside the girls' room, and listened. There it was again. Laughter. He closed his eyes, not because it hurt, but because he wasn't ready for what it meant. It took 3 days for Dr. Berman to arrive. A quiet man, measured, known for publishing more than he spoke. He didn't come with a team, no clipboard, no fanfare, just one small case, a laptop, and a soft smile when he met the girls. Richard didn't introduce Hannah, didn't explain what had led up to the call. He just gestured toward the sitting room and said, "Watch." That morning the house felt different, as if even the walls were waiting. No one rushed, no one whispered. There were no rules, no scripts, just time. The kind of time that opens instead of closes. Hannah sat with the girls on the rug, same as before. Sunlight angled in across the floor. Birdsong filtered through the open window. The scent of lavender hung in the air, calm, steady. And there was the mist bottle, held gently between her hands. Dr. Berman stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching without blinking. Richard stood behind him, not crossing his arms this time, not trying to control anything, just watching. Hannah began. Textures first, warm cloths, wooden blocks, smooth glass stones. Then sound, soft chimes, her own voice humming low. Then light. She sprayed the mist gently through the sunbeam. The air filled with sparkle. And like clockwork, Ella reached up. Jane turned her head. Then, Ella whispered, "It's spinning." Jane added, "It's gold today." Dr. Berman took one slow step forward. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just bent down, placed a small lens device near Jane's temple, and nodded. His eyes never left the girl's, but his voice was certain. There's photic response. Richard didn't move. Dr. Berman didn't breathe, looked at him. They have light perception. For a second, no one spoke, and then Richard exhaled, like a man finally coming up for air. That afternoon, the doctor stayed, ran quiet tests, asked Hannah about her notes, her methods, her past. He didn't question her credentials. He didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. By evening, the air in the mansion had changed. The girls weren't different, not really. But somehow, they felt more visible, as if the house had finally started looking back at them. Richard sat at the end of the hallway outside their room, not checking emails, not on a call, just sitting, listening. Inside, Ella was telling Jane about the color of a dream she'd had. Jane was humming something soft, and Hannah wasn't correcting, wasn't leading, just being. Rosa brought Richard tea, set it beside him without a word, then paused. "You've never sat here before." He didn't answer right away, then said, "I've never had a reason to." That night, Richard knocked gently on Hannah's door. She opened it, surprised, cautious. He didn't step inside, didn't raise his voice. He just asked, "How did you know?" Hannah didn't give a speech, didn't explain the research or the theory. She just looked at him and said, "Because I never stopped believing they could. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One person to keep seeing light, even when the world only sees darkness. And sometimes miracles need witnesses, not to validate them, but to carry them forward." The next morning, for the first time in years, Richard didn't leave for the city. He stayed. He ate breakfast with the girls. He watched Jane trace sunlight patterns on the tablecloth with her fingertip. Watched Ella rest her head on Hannah's shoulder without being asked. And when Hannah got up to clean the dishes, he looked at her and said, "You're not just a nanny." And for the first time since she arrived, Hannah smiled, not out of politeness, but because she finally believed him. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that feels like it remembers something. The light came in gold, not soft, not harsh, just warm, honest. The house was quiet, but not in the old way, not hollow, not heavy, just still. Waiting. Hannah rose before dawn. No alarm, no schedule. She just knew. She dressed simply. Scrubs, no shoes. In the east wing, she prepared the sitting room. Windows cracked open. The air, cool and clean. Everything arranged, not with science, but with love. Warm textures in a woven basket. Scents, lavender, orange peel, soft earth, a folded blanket, a water bowl. The mist bottle, standing by the window. And the light wand, flickering once, steady now, like it had been waiting too. The girls came in quietly, still in their pajamas. Ella clutched a stuffed bear. Jane held her sister's hand. They didn't ask what was happening. They didn't need to. Richard arrived a moment later. No suit, no phone. Just him. He didn't speak, didn't sit, just leaned against the doorframe and watched. Hannah knelt on the rug, smiled at the girls. "Are you ready?" Two small nods. She began. The music came first, barely audible. A solo cello, rising slow like breath. Then touch. Soft velvet passed across tiny fingers. Then warmth. Hannah cupped their hands around a mug of heated water, then scent, the orange peel, pressed between her palms. Then light. She stood near the window. Sunlight poured in, golden and full. She sprayed once, a soft, glistening mist. The droplets caught the beam, scattered it like stardust, and that's when it happened. Ella gasped. Her hands flew to her face. "I see it," she cried. "I see it, the sparkles." Jane turned, not just turned but looked, eyes open, focusing. "I see you," she whispered. "Ella, I see you." The room stood still. Time bent inward. Nothing else existed. Not money, not medicine, not fear. Just two little girls finding light. Hannah couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She fell to her knees, not from exhaustion, but awe. The bear dropped from Ella's arms. Jane reached forward, and Richard, the man who hadn't cried since the day he buried his wife, fell to the floor. Arms open, heart wide. He gathered them close, pressed their faces to his chest, and whispered over and over, "My babies, my beautiful girls." Tears ran down Hannah's cheeks, not because she had succeeded, but because they had. Because they were whole, even before this. But now, they knew. Rosa watched from the hallway, hands over her mouth. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Richard found Hannah on the garden steps. She was barefoot, arms around her knees, the mist bottle beside her. He sat down slowly. "I used to think protecting them meant keeping the world out," he said, "but you brought it back to them." He reached into his pocket. A letter, official, her name on it. "I had it reviewed, quietly, by someone who owed me a favor." She unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Reinstatement, no press, no noise, just closure and a beginning. She looked at him. "Thank you," he shook his head. "No, thank you for not giving up on them, or yourself." From inside, the girls called her name. Hannah stood, wiped her eyes, turned toward the light. Sometimes healing doesn't come in hospitals. Sometimes it starts in silence and ends in sunlight. Today, Ella and Jane attend a school for children with visual impairments. Their vision is partially restored, their spirits fully awake. Hannah still lives at the Walker estate, not as a nanny, not as a therapist, but as family. And every morning, as the sun filters in through the tall windows, she sprays a little mist into the light, and the girls still smile. He didn't even know what he was looking at. David stepped out of his car and time stopped. There, on the icy ground near the front gate, was a boy, thin, barely dressed, arms wrapped around someone. And then he saw her face, his mother, barefoot, cold, slumped in the boy's arms like a child, her silver hair tangled, her lips turning blue, and around both of them, a small blanket, damp and fraying, too thin to save anyone. David didn't think. He just ran, slipped on the driveway, cried out her name. His breath caught in his throat as he dropped to his knees. "Mum?" The boy looked up. His voice was barely more than a whisper. She was shaking. She didn't know where she was. I couldn't leave her. And then he passed out. That's when David felt something break inside of him. David Scott was a billionaire, CEO, powerhouse, feared in every boardroom from London to New York. But that morning, as he held his unconscious mother in one arm and a homeless teenage boy in the other, none of it mattered. Not the mansion behind him, not the empire he'd built, not the money, the titles, the life he thought was secure. All that remained was a question. How did this happen? How did a boy with nothing risk everything to save the one person David should have protected? How did a stranger in the snow end up doing what a son could not? And why did it feel like God had sent him? Before we begin this story, please pause for just a moment. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever questioned where God was in the middle of your storm, or if you've ever seen love show up in the most unexpected place, then this story is for you. Click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Because sometimes God sends angels in rags, And sometimes they're the ones who save us. The ambulance lights hadn't arrived yet. There was only the sound of wind, thick, sharp, and bitter against David's skin. He couldn't stop shaking, not from the cold, but from the sight of it. His mother's feet were purple, not bruised, frozen. Her nightgown was stuck to her legs, the hem caked in frost. She wasn't moving except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest, barely breathing. And this boy, this stranger, was still wrapped around her, as if protecting her from a world that had already taken too much. David's knees hit the ground with a thud. His hand reached for her wrist, ice cold, but her pulse was there. Faint. The boy didn't speak. He couldn't. His head drooped against Margaret's shoulder, lips cracked, eyes half closed. His breath came in stutters, every exhale a silent cry for help. David had no idea who he was, but something about the way the boy held her, gentle, desperate, made David's heart twist in ways he didn't understand yet. He tore off his coat and wrapped it around both of them. Then he reached for his phone, fingers trembling, voice unsteady. Emergency. 2 people. Hypothermia. My mother, a teenage boy. Send someone now, please. The call ended. Seconds passed like hours. He tried to lift his mother, but her limbs were stiff. So he stayed on the ground, one arm around her, one arm around the boy. And somewhere between the silence and the snow, David began to pray. He hadn't prayed in years, not since his father's funeral, not since he stopped believing that God still paid attention to people like him, people who chose money over meaning, deals over dinners, success over family. But now none of that mattered. He whispered it like a confession. God, please, don't take her, not like this. The boy let out a soft groan, almost inaudible. David leaned closer. She was lost, the boy rasped. She didn't know where she was. His words cracked like glass. I couldn't leave her. And just like that, he went still. David caught him, lowering him gently onto the snow. The boy's fingers were still curled around Margaret's blanket. So old, so thin, it looked more like a memory than a piece of fabric. David looked at it closely. A faded flower stitched into one corner. Hand-sewn, a mother's stitch. That's when something pierced his chest, not fear. Guilt. He'd hired security, cameras, a care team. He paid for everything to keep her safe. Except his own presence. Except the one thing she needed most. His face fell into his hands. Mom, he whispered, broken. A sound came from the driveway. Sirens. Blue and red light flickered across the snowbanks, painting shadows across the stone pillars of the gate. David stood as the paramedics jumped out. They didn't ask questions, they could see it in the boy's face. The woman's skin. The blanket between them. They moved quickly, wrapping his mother in warming sheets, checking vitals, lifting her onto the stretcher. Then came the boy. He's colder than she is, one of them said. They placed him on a second stretcher. David followed them both, not thinking. He opened the back of the ambulance and climbed in, one hand on his mother's arm, one hand resting over the boy's chest. He didn't know who he was, didn't know where he came from, but something deep inside told him. This wasn't a random act of kindness. This was something else. Maybe it was grace, maybe it was judgment, maybe it was God finally getting his attention. The doors shut. The ambulance drove off, and in the quiet hum of that ride, as snow tapped gently against the windows, David Scott sat between 2 lives he had never imagined would be connected, the mother who gave him everything, and a boy who had nothing, but gave her back to him. He bowed his head again, not from shame, but from a holy kind of awe, the kind that tells you, your life is about to change forever. Christopher hadn't spoken again, but his silence said enough. And as the ambulance sped toward the hospital, David's mind wasn't on meetings, it wasn't on money. It was on a question he couldn't stop hearing. Who is he? And somehow, he already knew. This boy wasn't here by accident. The wind cut through the alley like a blade. Christopher pulled his mother's blanket tighter around his shoulders. Though the truth was it hadn't held in warmth for years, it just reminded him of her. The fabric was thin now, patched in two corners with the smell of old soap still clinging to it. He hadn't slept. There wasn't anywhere safe to. Not really. Not when your last roof was a broken-down boarding house and your name wasn't on any lease. He'd been evicted that morning. Quietly. Without a scene. Just a soft apology from the landlord who'd looked tired of feeling sorry for him. "I gave you a few extra days, kid, but I've got a business to run." Christopher didn't argue. He just nodded, took the few things he owned, a backpack, a water bottle, 2 shirts and that old blanket, and stepped out into the cold. The sun was still low in the sky then, the kind of December morning where the cold settles into your bones before you've even taken your first step. He walked for hours, hands deep in his pockets, hood pulled low. He passed diners where people were laughing over pancakes, walked by warm houses with wreaths in the windows. He saw fathers helping their kids build snowmen, steam rising from mugs on porches. He didn't hate them. He didn't feel envy. Mostly, he felt invisible. At one point, his stomach cramped from hunger. He reached into his pocket and felt the last 2 bills he had, $3, wadded and damp from the snow. He could have gone to a fast food place, but he didn't want to sit there under fluorescent lights pretending to belong. So he kept walking. His path took him into one of the wealthier neighborhoods on the edge of town. Big stone houses, electric gates, driveways longer than some streets. He didn't mean to end up there. He just followed the quiet. And then he heard something, a sound carried faintly on the wind, crying, fragile, frightened. He stopped. It came again, a woman's voice, lost, disoriented. He followed it down a narrow path between 2 hedges toward the side gate of a large estate. And there she was, an elderly woman, standing in the snow. Her nightgown clung to her thin frame. Her hands trembled around a photo frame. The glass cracked. She was barefoot. "Ma'am?" Christopher called out gently. She didn't respond, just looked past him like she wasn't fully there. "I have to catch the train," she whispered. "James is waiting. I'm late." Her eyes were cloudy, darting left and right, searching a world only she could see. Christopher moved slowly toward her, keeping his voice low. "What's your name?" "Margaret," she said after a pause. "I think." He stepped closer. She didn't flinch, but she looked so small, so fragile, like the wrong gust of wind might blow her over. "You're cold," he said softly. "Let me help you." She nodded, almost like a child being told it was time to go home. He took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. Then he unwrapped the blanket from his own body and held it over both of them. "Where do you live, Margaret?" She looked around, lost. "Somewhere close, I think. But it doesn't feel right. Nothing feels right." He thought about calling someone. But who? He had no phone. And even if he did, he'd learned the hard way that people like him didn't get the benefit of the doubt. A black teenager with no address and no ID, found alone with an elderly white woman who couldn't explain who he was. That didn't end well. Ever. He couldn't risk the police. But he also couldn't leave her. So he did the only thing that felt right. He stayed. He helped her walk to a small alcove near the front gate. Stone walls on 3 sides, just enough to block the wind. He sat down first, then helped her sit beside him. He wrapped the blanket around their shoulders and held her close, trying to give her what warmth he could. For hours they sat like that, huddled together, breathing into the cold. He told her stories about his mum, how she used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, how she'd sing while washing dishes, off-key but full of joy, how she used to say, "Being poor ain't the worst thing. Being cruel is." Margaret didn't always respond, but sometimes she smiled. And just before her eyes began to close, she whispered, "You're good. Your mother would be proud." Christopher swallowed hard. "I promised her I'd stay kind," he said quietly, "even when the world wasn't." He tightened the blanket around her shoulders, and then he closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because there was nothing else he could do, except stay. Snow fell quietly around them, covering the blanket, the alcove, the photo frame in her hands. And in the silence between them, something holy was happening, though no one else saw it yet. God had already begun the rescue. The snow didn't stop. It fell heavy now, thick and fast, brushing against Christopher's face like icy fingers. He blinked it away, but his eyelashes were starting to freeze. Margaret had stopped speaking. She was curled against him in the alcove, her body growing stiller by the minute, her breath shallow, her hands limp. He'd wrapped the blanket around both of them as tightly as he could, tucking it under her legs, under her back. Still, she shivered. He'd never been this cold before, not even on the nights he'd slept behind church buildings or in alleyways between dumpsters. Not even when he'd spent a week on the roof of a bus stop, trying to stay off the streets after the shelter closed down. This was different, because now it wasn't just his body shutting down, it was hers. He leaned in closer, pressing his chest against her back, trying to shield her with what little strength he had left. His own jacket had stopped helping hours ago. The lining was torn, the zipper broken, but he didn't care. He didn't need it. She did. He looked down at her face. There was snow in her hair. Her skin had turned pale, almost translucent, and for a moment, he panicked. "Margaret?" No answer. He shook her gently. "Margaret, hey, you still with me?" A pause, a breath. Then, "I'm just tired," she whispered. Her voice sounded far away, smaller, like a child's. He pressed his forehead against the side of her head. "You gotta stay awake, okay? Just a little longer." She didn't reply. He searched the street again. Nothing. No lights, no sound, no movement. He hadn't seen a single car pass since they sat down. It was like the world had closed its eyes. He whispered to her again, "Tell me something, anything, a memory. Your son, what's he like?" Margaret stirred. Her lips moved slowly. "David, he had curly hair, just like his father, always wanted to climb things." Christopher smiled softly. "That's good. Keep going." "He used to sing to me," she murmured, "when he was small, before the world got too loud." Then she was quiet again. Christopher clenched his jaw. The cold was making it hard to think now. He could feel his fingers going numb, his toes too. The kind of numb that wasn't normal, the kind that made you worry if they'd come back. He thought about leaving, just for a minute, to find help, knock on a door, bang on a window. But every time he started to shift away, Margaret whimpered, and every time she did, his chest ached. He couldn't leave her. She was someone's mother. She was his mother, in a way that only made sense in moments like this. He reached into his bag and pulled out the only other thing he had, a small zippered pouch that held the photo of his mom, and the harmonica she gave him before she died. He couldn't play anymore, his lips too cold, his breath too shaky, but he held it anyway. "I used to play this for my mum," he said aloud, voice soft, "when she was in the hospital. She said music made the pain float." Margaret didn't respond, but he kept talking. "She used to say, 'Gee, you'll never be poor if you still have kindness.'" He laughed once, bitter and hollow. "Didn't make sense to me back then. Thought kindness didn't feed you, didn't keep the lights on." He looked at Margaret's face, peaceful but far too still. But maybe she was right. Maybe this is the only thing that matters. He didn't know how long they sat like that. Minutes, hours. Time had no shape anymore, only cold and silence and prayer. He didn't speak them out loud, just let them echo through his heart. "God, please, just get her through this. Forget me. Just save her." A gust of wind broke around the corner of the wall, sharp as glass. Christopher winced. He pulled Margaret closer again, though he barely had the strength. Then, faint. So faint he thought he imagined it. A squeal. Tires. Far off. He lifted his head, turned. A car. Headlights cutting through the snow, approaching slowly, then faster. Christopher's lips parted, but he didn't speak. Didn't move, because his body couldn't anymore. His eyes fluttered. He looked at Margaret one last time, her face resting against his chest, and he let go. Not because he wanted to, but because his body had nothing left to give. The car skidded to a stop, a door slammed, footsteps, fast, heavy, running, and somewhere behind his fading mind, Christopher heard a voice. "Mom, oh God, Mom!" But by then the world had gone quiet, and the snow just kept falling. The hospital room was warm. David sat in a chair between two beds, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. The lights overhead were soft, but nothing felt soft about this moment. His mother was still. And the boy, Christopher, the nurse had called him, hadn't opened his eyes since the ambulance. Machines beeped gently. Monitors glowed. It was quiet, in the way places are when something holy or terrible has just happened. David hadn't spoken in a while. He didn't know what he'd say, who he'd say it to, or if anyone would even hear him. Margaret lay to his right, her face turned slightly toward the window. They'd given her something warm to wear, wrapped her in layers, placed heating pads beneath the blankets. The color was returning to her face, but her mind was somewhere else, still wandering, still far. To his left. Christopher. 17 maybe. Skin pale. Lips still cracked. He looked younger here. Smaller. The blanket that covered him now was clean, white, hospital-issued, but David's eyes kept drifting to the corner of the chair where the other one sat, the tattered handmade one the boy had used to cover them both. There were still traces of snow on it when they'd arrived. It was folded now neatly, as if someone couldn't bring themselves to throw it away. David stared at it. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment. That first moment, when he saw them. The boy's arms around his mother, shielding her with nothing but his body. No name, no reason, no explanation, just presence. The kind of presence David hadn't given her in years. A lump rose in his throat, sharp and dry. He hadn't meant to become distant. He hadn't chosen neglect, at least not on purpose. Life had simply gotten louder. Board meetings, takeovers, flights, success stacked on top of success, until his world was too tall for anyone to reach him, including her, especially her. And somewhere along the climb he stopped calling as often. Hired people to stand in for love. Sent flowers instead of showing up. She'd always said she was fine, that the nurses were lovely, that she didn't want to be a burden. But now, in seeing her on that stretcher, blue and shaking and quiet, David knew the truth. She had needed him, and he hadn't been there. He pressed his knuckles against his lips. Across the room, Christopher stirred. His eyes opened, just slightly, blinking against the soft light. His breath shallow, chest rising with effort. David stood. "You're safe," he said quickly, voice quiet but firm. "You're in a hospital, you're okay." The boy didn't speak, just looked around, confused. Then his eyes fell on Margaret, lying motionless in the next bed. His face shifted. Fear, then relief, then something else, something David couldn't quite name. "I didn't know who she was," Christopher whispered. "I just couldn't leave her." David nodded slowly. "I know." They sat in silence. A long, full silence that said more than words. Then Christopher tried to sit up, but winced. "You should rest," David said. "I'm not staying," Christopher muttered. "Did what I could. I'll go after." David didn't answer right away. He pulled the old blanket from the chair and placed it gently on the end of Christopher's bed. "Is this yours?" he asked. Christopher nodded, eyes lowered. "My mom made it, before she passed." David stared at it for a moment, then looked at him. "You kept her warm," he said quietly. "You kept both of you warm." Christopher swallowed hard. "It's what she would have done." David didn't know what to say to that, but something in him cracked, not all at once, not loudly, just enough to let a little light in. He turned back toward the window, arms folded. "Don't leave yet," he said finally. please. Why? David's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because I don't think this is over. Christopher didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. And as the quiet settled in again, two men sat in silence, one burdened by what he'd missed, the other unsure why he'd been called to step in. And between them, a woman sleeping beneath hospital sheets, whose life had just changed both of theirs. The car ride home was quiet. Not cold, not tense, just quiet, like something fragile had entered the space between them, and neither man knew how to hold it yet. Christopher sat in the back seat staring out the window. David didn't say much. He just drove, eyes fixed on the snow-covered road ahead, one hand on the wheel, one hand resting near the old blanket folded on the passenger seat. The same blanket Christopher had carried like a second skin, the same one he'd used to save a woman he didn't know. The silence stretched. As they pulled through the estate gates, something in David's chest shifted. He'd passed through those gates 1,000 times, but this time felt different. Not because of who was inside, but because of who was coming in. He parked near the side entrance. The snow had finally stopped, but the ground still crunched beneath their shoes. Christopher hesitated when he stepped out. His eyes flicked upward toward the house, then toward the edges of the property, then toward the horizon, as if deciding whether to stay or run. David noticed. "You're not a prisoner," he said, voice low. "You don't have to stay, but I'd like you to." Christopher didn't answer right away. "I don't belong here," he said. David paused, then gestured to a smaller path behind the house, toward the guest house tucked into the trees. "Come in for the night," he offered. "Get warm, rest, that's all." Christopher looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The guest house was quiet, a soft two-bedroom cottage used mostly for business guests or distant family. Clean, private, simple. David unlocked the door, stepped inside first, and flicked on the lights. "I'll send up some food. There's a shower, extra clothes in the closet. Probably too big, but better than hospital gowns." Christopher stood in the doorway, not moving. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. David turned to face him. "Because you saved my mother's life." "I didn't do it for anything. I know." Silence. "But that doesn't mean you don't deserve something," David said. "You matter, son." Christopher flinched slightly at the word. Son. He hadn't heard it in a while, not in a way that meant anything. He looked down, his voice quieter now. "People only let me stay when they want something." David shook his head. "I don't want anything." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the folded blanket and placed it on the couch gently, like something sacred. "Your mother made this?" he asked. Christopher nodded once. "She used to say," he paused, then finished, barely audible, "Even if the world forgets you, God won't." David sat down slowly across from him. "I think she was right." The silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full. David stood. "I'll give you some space," he said. "You've had enough eyes on you for one day." Christopher didn't move. He just stood there in the doorway, one hand on the doorknob, one foot still outside, and then, slowly, he stepped in. He closed the door behind him, not with certainty, but with a kind of surrender, the kind that says, maybe just for tonight I don't have to run. David watched him for a moment longer, then turned to leave. Before he reached the door, he stopped. "Thank you, Christopher." Christopher didn't say anything, didn't need to. That night in the quiet of the guest house, Christopher sat on the edge of the bed, blanket in his hands, unsure if he was still dreaming. And in the silence, David stood alone in the hallway outside, one man wondering if he could give someone a home, the other wondering if he could ever belong to one again. It had been 2 weeks since the storm. The snow had melted off the trees. The air was still cold, but calmer now. There was sun most days, the kind that didn't bring warmth, but reminded you it might come back. Christopher hadn't left the guest house. David hadn't asked him to. There were fresh clothes in the drawers, food on the counter. Tutors came by once just to test the waters. No one pushed, no one pressured. But every morning, Margaret would ask the same question from her armchair by the window. Is he still here? And when David said yes, her face softened. He's a good boy, she'd whisper, then go back to staring at the wind chimes. Christopher helped where he could, quietly. He carried books to Margaret's room, set the table, took the trash out without being asked. He never lingered, never assumed. He moved like someone trying not to wake the house. But David saw him, saw the way he looked at the photos in the hallway, the way he paused before entering a room, like he was waiting for someone to tell him he didn't belong there. And it broke something in David, slowly. So one afternoon, he knocked on the guest house door and stepped inside with 2 mugs of coffee. Christopher was seated on the floor, hunched over a notebook. Working on something? David asked. Christopher shrugged. Just writing. David handed him the coffee, sat across from him on the rug. You've been quiet lately. Christopher nodded. David waited. I don't know how to be here, Christopher finally said. David studied him. You're already here. I mean, I don't know how to accept it. There it was, the confession under every quiet gesture. David set his mug down. This isn't charity, he said gently. It's not a favor. I brought you here because I wanted you here. Christopher looked away. I'm not used to people wanting me anywhere. David leaned back. My father left when I was 7, he said. I never really forgave him for it, not even after he died. Christopher looked up. I spent years thinking I had to earn everything. Love, approval, belonging. If I wasn't useful, I wasn't worth keeping. A pause. I think I've done the same thing to other people, including my mom. Christopher stared at the coffee in his hands. The mug had a crack in it. Are you saying I remind you of you? David gave a quiet smile. I'm saying, I see myself in you, and I don't want to make the same mistake again. The silence that followed felt sacred, but it didn't last, because just then the front door opened, fast. David's business partner, Eric, stepped in unannounced. David, I've been calling. We've got 3 properties falling through. Wait. He stopped. His eyes landed on Christopher, the couch, the notebooks, the coffee. This him? Eric asked, lowering his voice. The boy from the papers? David stood slowly. Eric, I just thought he was gone by now, Eric said with a sharp glance. Didn't realize we were running a shelter now. The room fell cold. Christopher's eyes dropped. His body stiffened. I should go, he said quickly, rising. No, David said, stepping forward. You stay. But Christopher was already grabbing his things. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He just moved like someone who'd been here before, who recognized the change in a room when it stopped being safe. David caught his arm, gently. You don't have to leave. Christopher looked at him, eyes dark and quiet. Yes, I do. He stepped past Eric and out the door. David stood there, the air in the room thick with everything that hadn't been said. He could still feel the warmth of the coffee mug in his palm. And somewhere behind him, the old blanket lay folded on the edge of the couch, waiting. The guest house was too quiet. The mug Christopher had left behind still sat on the table, cold and half full. The folded blanket hadn't moved. Neither had David. He stood in the center of the room long after the boy walked out. He hadn't said much to Eric after that. Just one look, sharp, cold, and final. Eric had gotten the message. He left without another word. Now. It was just David. The clock on the wall ticked softly, but time didn't feel like it was moving. Not really. It just sat, heavy, unmoving, like the weight in his chest. He'd messed up. Not with what he said, but with what he hadn't done fast enough. He should have stepped in sooner, should have spoken louder, should have shut the door before the boy heard something that sounded too familiar. David sat on the couch and put his face in his hands. He was losing him, the one person who reminded him what mattered, the one soul that hadn't asked for anything and gave everything. David thought about the look in Christopher's eyes, not anger, not defiance, just something quieter, something older, the look of someone who'd learned over and over again that safety never stayed, that kindness usually had a deadline, that the moment you started to believe you belonged, someone reminded you you didn't. David leaned back and stared at the ceiling. How do you rebuild trust when you barely know how to hold it? He stood slowly, crossed the room and picked up the blanket, ran his fingers over the stitches in the corner. He remembered what Christopher had said the night he arrived. She made this, before she passed. Something about that line stayed with him, not just the grief but the care, the memory sewn into every thread. David folded it carefully, then held it to his chest, and for the first time in years he whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Later that evening the estate was quiet. Margaret sat near the window, holding a cup of tea with both hands. Her eyes were clearer today, not fully lucid, but closer. David sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then she looked up. "Where's the boy?" she asked softly. David looked down. "He left." Margaret didn't respond at first. "He shouldn't have," she said. David nodded once. "I know." She took a slow sip of tea. "He reminds me of James," she said quietly. David looked at her, surprised. "Dad?" She nodded. He had that same look, like the world hadn't been kind to him, but he hadn't let it change his heart. David swallowed. "I think he's sleeping on the street again," he said, barely above a whisper. Margaret reached across the table and touched his hand. "Then go find him." David looked into her eyes. "You think he'll want to come back?" Her voice didn't waver. "He doesn't need to want to. He needs to know someone still sees him." That night, David drove slowly through the streets of town. He didn't know where to look. Christopher didn't have a phone. No last name. No place. He passed the diner on 8th, the shelter gate near the train tracks, the alley behind the church where the Christmas decorations were still up. Nothing. Then, just past the bridge, he saw a shape curled on a bench. A figure wrapped in a too-thin jacket, knees tucked to chest, head down. David pulled over, stepped out. His footsteps were loud on the frozen pavement. Christopher didn't move. David knelt beside him, quietly. He didn't speak at first, just placed the blanket, folded warm, across the boy's back. Christopher stirred, blinking slowly, but didn't sit up. David spoke, voice low. "I didn't bring you into that house to fix you. I brought you in because you showed me something I'd forgotten, and I'm not letting you walk away without knowing that." Silence. Then, Christopher whispered, "I didn't mean to stay. I just didn't want to leave yet." David's voice broke a little. "Then don't." They sat there on the bench for a long time. No promises, just two people in the cold, one who had lost too much, and one finally learning how to hold something that stayed. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of something softer. Christopher had been back for a week. He still didn't say much, still kept to himself. But now, when David asked him to join for dinner, he said yes. When Margaret called for him, he came, helped her with her slippers, held her arm as she walked through the garden. Some mornings David would wake early, glance out the window and see Christopher on the porch, knees drawn up, blanket over his shoulders, just watching the sun rise. Something about the way he sat reminded David of his younger self, always halfway out the door just in case love turned cold. But the air had shifted between them. The silence was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with learning how to stay. The night of the gala arrived quietly. It wasn't flashy, David had insisted. Just a warm evening at the estate. Candles, music, friends, families, supporters. The Margaret Scott Foundation for Homeless Youth was being introduced to the world. Christopher had helped design the logo. He didn't ask for credit, but David told the team to place his name at the bottom of every flyer. Youth Advisor, Christopher James. He hadn't told Christopher yet. He wanted him to see it for the first time when he walked in. That evening, Margaret sat in her wheelchair by the fireplace, wearing a soft blue shawl and a small string of pearls. David bent down beside her, straightened the blanket across her knees. You okay, Mom? She nodded slowly. Do they know about the boy? She asked. David smiled. Tonight they will. Guests arrived in waves, handshakes, stories, warm hugs. But through it all, David's eyes kept drifting to the entryway, waiting for one person. Then he saw him, Christopher, wearing a dark sweater, hair combed, nervous. He paused in the doorway, unsure. David stepped forward, offering a quiet nod, not beckoning, not demanding. Just an open door. Christopher stepped in. The room felt warmer. Margaret smiled when she saw him, reached for his hand. You look like someone I used to love, she whispered. You still do, he said, kneeling beside her. David took the mic later that night. The lights dimmed. The crowd hushed. And for the first time, he told the story publicly. About the night his mother nearly died. About the gates left open. About a boy with nothing but a blanket, and the kind of love money couldn't measure. He didn't cry at first, but when he said, "He gave her back to me," his voice cracked, and the room broke open with silence. He turned to Christopher then, who stood quietly near the piano, hands folded. "Will you come up?" David asked. Christopher looked unsure, but Margaret gave a small nod, and so he walked forward, slowly, humbly. The crowd didn't clap, not yet. They watched him like something sacred had entered the room. David handed him the mic. Christopher stared down for a moment, then looked up. "I didn't know who she was," he said softly, "but I knew she was cold and scared, and I couldn't walk away." He paused. "My mom used to say, 'Kindness is the only thing that proves we're still human.'" Another pause. "I just stayed, that's all." But those 3 words wrapped around the room like a benediction. I just stayed. And then, a standing ovation. No music, no grand speech. Just truth, spoken in the quietest voice in the room. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, David and Christopher walked down the long stone path toward the front gate, the same place where it all began. They stopped at the spot where the snow had been, where a boy had wrapped himself around a woman he didn't know. David looked at him. "Everything changed here," he said. Christopher looked up at the stars. "Because I didn't walk away." 2 years later, the house felt different, quieter in some ways, fuller in others. The walls no longer echoed with silence. They held memories now, laughter, music, conversations at the dinner table that didn't rush. Margaret had passed away one morning in spring. The cherry blossoms had just started to bloom. Christopher had been the one sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, reading aloud from her favorite poetry book. She'd opened her eyes only once that morning, looked at him, then at David, and whispered, "You both came back to me." Those were her last words. She passed with peace on her face, with love on both sides of her, and with a life redeemed, not through wealth or achievement, but through presence. Christopher didn't move back into the guest house after that. He stayed in the main house, not because David asked him to, but because by then it felt like home. He still carried the blanket, the one his mother had made, still folded it every night, still kept it close, but now it rested beside textbooks, not under bridges. Christopher had enrolled in college, studying social work. "I want to be the one who sees people," he told David one day, "the way nobody used to see me." He volunteered at the youth shelter every weekend, helped kids find their feet, taught them how to open bank accounts, how to speak up, how to stay kind, even when the world wasn't. The staff at the foundation called him Mr. James, but most of the kids just called him Chris. They trusted him, not because of his title, but because of his story. On the anniversary of that night, the one that changed everything, David and Christopher drove to a small cemetery just outside town. They didn't speak much, just walked together to a modest stone beneath an old oak tree. Margaret Scott, beloved mother. Kindness is the proof of love. David knelt down first, placed a single rose. Christopher stood beside him, holding something in his hands. A harmonica. The last thing his mother ever gave him. He hadn't played it since the night he nearly froze to death, but today, he did. He sat on the grass, eyes closed, breath slow, and played Amazing Grace. Soft, broken, full, the wind barely moved. The world just listened. David didn't speak, didn't wipe his tears. He just sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder. When the song ended, they stayed there for a while. Two lives that had once lived on opposite sides of a locked gate, now bound by something that didn't need words. Back at the foundation, a new boy arrived that evening. Maybe 14, thin, quiet, hands buried in the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. He stood near the door, eyes darting between strangers. Christopher saw him from across the room. He walked over slowly, not with authority, but kneeled down to his level, offered his hand. "Hey," he said, "I'm Chris." The boy didn't answer. "That's okay," Chris said gently. "You don't have to talk yet." He stood and gestured down the hallway. "Come on, you're safe here." The boy hesitated, then followed. Some stories begin with a miracle. Ours began with a blanket, torn at the edges, threadbare, but wrapped in love. It was never about rescue. It was always about staying, when it was hard, when it was cold, when no one else stopped. Christopher James stayed. And because he did, a woman lived, a billionaire found his soul, and 100 more found a home. One act of kindness can change a life. Sometimes it changes two, and sometimes it saves them all. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, that broken people can become blessings, and that love still finds its way home, then stay with us. Here at Elevated Heart Stories, we don't just tell stories, we share moments that lift the soul. Stories that remind us of God's hand in the quiet places, of people who chose to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. So if your heart is still beating a little heavier than usual, if something inside you whispered, "Don't forget this," subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because maybe, just maybe, you've been the one who stayed, or you're still waiting for someone who will. We're honored to have you here. Until next time, this is Elevated Heart Stories, where love still lives and hope never leaves the room.